So two things here at the start before going back to material. One is a reminder again that the second midterm exam is this Friday in class. 30 questions, multiple choice, covering the material mostly since the first midterm, as in like somewhere in flashlights, and finishing with material I'll do today and Wednesday, which is sort of microwave ovens, more or less. So that's one item. Bring pencils, remember that. And the other one is a lot of you have written to me about Orion. What's Orion going on? The purpose in assigning the Orion, or even having you do it at all, is just to keep thinking about these concepts and challenging yourself. That's the only reason I do it. Grading them, I don't care specifically about them, but it's to your own advantage, particularly in preparing for exam, to look at the Orion questions. And I'm going to make sure that I will score them in a way that nearly everyone will get full credit for them. It's people who don't do anything or just like last semester I had a person do 180 of them in 18 minutes, which was 3 seconds each. Just trying to get credit for having done them. No, think about them. 3 seconds is not enough time. Anyway, I'll figure it out. I think what I'm going to use is there's an overall semester score that begins. It's not performance score. It's got another name. It's like a trademark. And as long as that's above a threshold like 60%, you're good to go. Get full credit for the whole, that 10% of the grade. Okay, so I'll fix this. Okay, any other logistical questions, class structure stuff that's still lingering around? Okay, where things sort of left off last time was the idea of an electromagnetic wave. I've described its structure. They come in a variety of flavors, but the basic idea is that it consists only of two things, an electric field and magnetic field. Those fields are at right angles to one another, and they're at right angles to the direction which the combined structure, namely a wave, travels. So if you have an electric field at one location along the way that's up and a magnetic field that's towards you, that wave is a wave heading toward the right. Off it goes at the famous speed of light. We'll see that when matter is around, when charged things like glass is present, that the wave life gets a little more complicated for the wave because it jiggles the charges in the material. And to a much lesser extent, it interacts with the magnetic structure in the material, because most materials are not magnetic, so they're oblivious to this passing magnetic field, but they're not oblivious to the passing electric field. Okay, so that's the wave, and we'll see those waves again heading off, because we'll get into how sunlight moves, and sunlight is just electromagnetic waves. The issue at hand at the moment, though, is how do you launch the things and how do you detect these electromagnetic waves? And I gave you a short piece on it last time. The waves are often created with the help of devices known as tank circuits, which are simply resonant devices for electric charge. So they're electric things that have a dynamic, they go through a cycle over and over again. And they do it electrically. The world's full of things that have cycles that go through mechanically, like the string of a guitar. You pluck it, it rhythmically goes through this motion. The tank circuit, same kind of idea. It's totally analogous. And the energy in a tank circuit, which consists only of two things, an inductor, which is you can think of as an electromagnet, something that stores energy in its magnetic field, and a capacitor, which is a device that stores energy in its electric field by way of having two oppositely charged plates. This tank circuit, which seems, why do this? Energy goes back and forth between stored in the electric field of the highly charged capacitor, that is a capacitor full of separated charge, and the inductor when it's full of magnetic field. So at one moment in time, the capacitor is fully charged and the inductor is empty. No magnetic field, no current, boring. Short period of time later, there's no charge left in the capacitor. It's used up all its charge, running current through the inductor. And now the inductor is full of current and full of magnetic field. So the energy goes back and forth from the capacitor to the inductor to the capacitor to the inductor, back and forth rhythmically. That's probably a good enough description. Is that the details, we can get lost in them for years, but that's the basic idea. And you okay with that idea? This thing that rhythmically moves charge back and forth and has its energy goes back and forth between electric and magnetic fields. Well, that's useful, as I said last time, because it allows you to build up electromagnetic energy in the tank circuit. You don't have to put it all in once. You can rhythmically, every time the capacitor has fully recharged, it's in that part of the cycle, you add one more little dose of positive charge on the top and one more little dose of negative charge on the bottom. So you just add a little more, which an action which requires work, because you have to shove these additional positive and negative charges into their respective plates. So you have to add energy. If you keep doing it rhythmically at the right moment in each cycle, you can gradually build up more and more energy going back and forth in the tank circuit. And that's the kind of idea that for example, radio station, to really get the charge moving up and down its antenna to broadcast. Sometimes they'll tell you how much electromagnetic power they're actually sending out into the air. And some of the AM stations will talk about 50,000 watts. You probably have heard that. Broadcasting across the Midwest with 50,000 watts of power. Coming out of Chicago or something like that. And you can detect it across half the United States. Out goes that wave. To really get that kind of wave coming out, you need to be moving up and down fantastic amounts of charge up and down the antenna, and they accumulate that energy in tank circuits, so they can really get it sloshing up and down. So that's a tank circuit. Questions about a tank circuit? Why you want to use it? If you take the tank circuit and you grab this top plate of the capacitor, and you grab the bottom plate of the capacitor, no charge, you just grab it, and you yank it out straight. You unwind all the coil. I told you this last time, now I'm sort of fleshing it out again. You yank it out, you end up with a straight wire. You just shrink the plates to nothing. The plates, it turns out, aren't crucial. The end of a wire, two ends of a wire can make a capacitor too. So you just grab that end of the wire, pull it straight, you still have a tank circuit. It's just a really stupid one. It has no turns in its coil. It's just a straight line. That's still a tank circuit. It still has an inductor, which is the center portion, and it has a capacitor, which is the top and bottom portions of that wire. It's still a tank circuit. It's still got a rhythm to it. But it also behaves beautifully as an antenna. And if you get this guy going, and let me pull up there we go, half-wave antenna. So this is that crazy tank circuit that just has it's just a straight line. And is it going to repeat? Yeah. So the current, it's charging the top and bottom of the capacitor, fully charged. Now the current's flowing through the inductor and becoming a magnetic field. Now it's recharged. Now it's flowing through the inductor and magnetic field. And now it's recharged. And each time it recharges upside down. So it's negative charge up, and it's about to recharge. Here it goes. Now it's positive charge up, and recharge again, and now it's negative charge up. And the rhythm of this motion is fixed by this geometry of that wire. The tank circuits, in general, they have a rhythm that depends on characteristics of the capacitor and characteristics of the inductor, which are known as capacitance and inductance. And the details there don't matter either. But when you yank this guy straight, it again has a rhythm that's determined by its capacitance and its inductance. And that rhythm turns out to have a very simple relationship. The rhythm is, how does this work? The length of that wire is related to the wavelength of the wave that it transmits. And it's actually the wire is half as long as the wavelength of the wave that it transmits. So that actually defines the rhythm. The whole frequency is determined by that effect. And can I do it while I'm standing here? Can I get you the frequency? The frequency is the speed of light over the wavelength. And this is half a wavelength long, so it's too hard. I'll be off by a factor of 2. The point is, in fact, the shorter that antenna gets, the faster the motion completes. It cycles faster. So it's proportional to the length, the cycle time. No, the time it goes through the cycle, what's known as the period, is proportional to how long the wire is. So an antenna that takes a long time to cycle is very long. An antenna that's short cycles very rapidly. You, John? Does the electromagnetic wave always go horizontally from this? That's another question. That's a great question. You okay with the idea that this charge is moving up and down there rhythmically? The longer the antenna gets, the longer time it takes? This, if you'll notice, the electric and magnetic fields here around the middle of the antenna. The electric field's vertical. You can see it. It's downward now. It's upward now. It's always pointing towards the negative end of the antenna, whatever's currently got the negative charge. The magnetic field curls around the antenna, first one direction, then it curls the other direction, back and forth. It's always curling around with the right-hand rule, depending on which way the current's flowing. Flowing up, flowing down, curls the other opposite directions. This sends out an electromagnetic wave that has a vertical electric field and a horizontal magnetic field, just as you see there in the drawing, in the animation. The wave goes out with those two parts to its field, and it goes out preferentially horizontally. And that's horizontally to your left, to your right, toward you and away from you. It goes out in this whole direction. That's its preferred direction of travel. And I can illustrate this if I remember to pull out my little electric charges. There they are. If I'm just moving electric charges up and down like this, you guys can see those charges moving pretty easily. You can tell positive charge up, negative charge up, positive. That's easy. But if I move them toward you and away from you, it's not so easy to tell. You can't, this kind of motion is harder for you to detect. And similarly, if you tried to receive the electromagnetic wave that I'm transmitting, if this was actually charged, I'm going back and forth like this, you're going to get a very weak electromagnetic wave. And that's, in this situation, what that means is that anybody who's horizontally oriented relative to the antenna, so the antenna is vertical and you're on the same, you're out in an open field, you're going to easily be able to detect the charge going up and down, and the wave will be strong. But if you're flying above the antenna in an airplane, and you're, from that perspective, you're seeing the charge go toward you, away from you, toward you, away from you, the effect's very weak. In fact, in principle, there is no electromagnetic wave transmitted at all, straight up off the tip of the antenna. It's dead. Which is fine, because most of the time, the radio stations want to transmit to people near the ground, or on the ground. They don't care about transmitting to the birds, maybe a passing airplane. So a vertical antenna does a great job of sending electromagnetic wave out horizontally. Furthermore, it's a vertically polarized wave. It's a wave that's got a vertical electric field. Yeah? When I say that the direction of the fields that I'm sending out there, the electric field's up and down, and the magnetic field is north and south, or east and west. Or that is yes. And you'll find some of my old questions, and ones that I'm likely to reuse again, is suppose you guys are north of me right now, and suppose we got this antenna going up and down. And if you go looking for the electromagnetic wave that's coming from that antenna toward you, which way is its electric field going to be pointing? Well, up and down. That's easy. How about its magnetic field? Oh, not so obvious. The magnetic field is going to it's going to be east-west. Why not north-south? Because the wave is coming toward you, heading north. And electromagnetic waves have this characteristic that they travel, the direction in which they travel is perpendicular to both their electric field and their magnetic field. So if they're heading north toward you, if the wave's heading north toward you, the north-south direction has been used by the direction of travel of the wave itself. So its magnetic field can't be north-south. It's at right angles to that, namely east-west. Is that okay? So, I mean, this might all seem very hypothetical to you, but if you're looking to actually receive the radio wave, for example, that's transmitted, again, by an AM station, AM radio, by convention, for 100 years probably, has occupied a range of the possible frequencies and wavelengths. Frequency and wavelengths are inverse of one another, related with the speed of light. The longer the wavelength, the more infrequently a crest goes by, so the fewer crests per second, which is the measure of frequency. Crest per second is frequency, spacing between crests is wavelength. If you multiply the two of them together, you get the speed of light, the speed at which the wave travels. So for 100 years or so, AM radio has occupied a range of frequencies corresponding to about 550 kilocycles per kilohertz. So that's about 500,000 cycles per second to about 1.6 million. That's, if you still have an AM radio, you know, if these things, the dinosaur stuff still exists, you know, it goes from 550-ish to 1.6. That's the range from 550,000 cycles per second to 1.6 million cycles per second. The wavelengths of those waves are, oh gosh, what's he, 550? That's 600 meters down to 200 meters. They're long wavelength. To get an antenna like this, what's called a half-wave antenna that's nice and resonant, that works beautifully, you want that antenna to be half the wavelength of the wave. And if the waves you're working with are somewhere between 200 meters and 600 meters in wavelength, you want an antenna that's half that, somewhere between 100 meters and 300 meters. It's really long. So you make it vertical. They're all vertical. So AM is transmitted by general convention. It's transmitted as a vertically polarized wave by a tall vertical antenna. And if you want to go receiving that wave, because it's going to shoot out in all horizontal directions, which is fine. Everybody loves it. You know, that's where people are, after all. If you want to receive it, if you want to receive its electric field, you want a vertical antenna, ideally very long. You actually can receive it with a magnetic antenna, a coil of wire, and that's how it's usually received. Surprise, surprise. It's received by inducing currents in a coil of wire because it's got a magnetic field that goes left and right. Ooh, changing magnetic fields are electric, right? So you put a coil of wire out, and as the wave comes at you, you want to actually aim the coil of wire toward the oncoming wave. As the wave comes at you, its magnetic field is going to be left, right, left, right, left, right. That will induce currents in the coil of wire, and you can receive the wave that way. That's how it's usually done. A lot of AM antennas are a little loop of wire. You may have seen that. You also can tell where the wave's coming from. You think way back, you know, sometimes when you watch historical television, I'm thinking of World War II movies and television, they're often going around trying to find, it's usually the Germans, sorry, probably politically, whatever. The Germans are trying to find the resistance transmitters, and they're there with their coils of wire looking. What are they looking for? They're looking for that magnetic field in pushing back and forth. When you aim the coil of wire right at the transmitter, you get the strongest effect because the magnetic field's coming right at you. So that's the story. Is this okay? Your questions about what I've just said? All right. So this kind of antenna mounted vertically like this transmits a beautiful vertically polarized electromagnetic wave that goes out horizontally very nicely. If you want to transmit a horizontally polarized wave with a horizontal electric field, you need to rotate this baby 90 degrees. It has consequences. When you do that, the wave goes out with a horizontal electric field vertical magnetic field, and the transmission is preferentially along this plane. You send some of it into the ground and some of it into the sky, and you tend to aim it at the receiver people. You know, you guys would receive it. People off over there and over there would get a lousy wave. Not much action for them. So a horizontal antenna is it has some directionality to it. It doesn't go to everybody. You guys are probably used to, like, this is approximately Wi-Fi. It's not literally a Wi-Fi antenna. Those guys are Wi-Fi antennas up there on the catwalk. Those are trying to send out waves. The waves come out polarized along the piece of wire that's hiding inside those. So some of these are sort of vertical polarized, some of them are sort of in between, but they're working on trying to make it so you can receive them and mentally depart from class as a result. All right? So this is a half-wave antenna. It has a top that develops one charge and a bottom that develops a different charge. It turns out that half-wave antennas are not easy. There's a problem with that. That means you have to have the antenna is very long, and you have to go to the middle and interact with the middle when you try to run your transmitter. A lot of antennas are not a full half-wave antenna. They use a trick, and the trick is, how can I do this? I want to show it. Oh, get away from here. Why is it so slow? Oh, there. A half-wave antenna is one that is literally a half a wavelength long, and it develops a lot of charge at its ends. And you often, it's okay. So it's halfway long. You can cheat and make do with only half of that antenna. What is called a quarter wave antenna. A wavelength is a distance, and if you make the wire half the wavelength long, it's resonant. If you make the wire a quarter of a wavelength long, it by itself is not resonant, but you can cheat by putting it above a conducting surface. And the value of the conducting surface is, suppose this is a conducting surface. This was metal. If I hold positive charge above this piece of metal, I'm going to attract negative charges in the surface and repel positive charges in the surface, right? And because it's metal, it's conducting, the charges can move long distance. So if I hold this positive charge here, let me hold it close, it's going to pull negative charge close to it, and it will develop what's called an image charge down below that is simply the negative charge has been attracted by the real positive charge above. And that image effect is actually perfect. If I pulled the charge here, I get exactly the same amount of charge developed in the conducting surface, and it appears to be located exactly the same distance below the surface as the real charge I have above is located above the surface. If I make this higher, that goes farther down, and so on. It's a reflection of my charge. It is inverted because of because positive charges attract negative charges. The charge in the mirror image is inverted. Any positive up here becomes negative down there. So, but this behavior is amazingly symmetric. It's one way of thinking about why there are reflections. When you look in a mirror, why do you see yourself? You're actually seeing the charges moving around that surface, creating the image charges, the images of charges that are outside the mirror. It's through the looking glass world. Yeah, obviously, physicists can wax poetic about it, but that's physicists. So, the point of this is that you can make what looks to the world like a half-wave antenna by putting only the top half above a conducting surface. The bottom half of the half-wave antenna doesn't really exist. It's a reflection in that conducting surface. All right? And if you think of a lot of antenna situations, like the antennas on automobiles, in many cases, the antenna sticks up out of a metal surface. It's perfect. It has everything you want. They're typically they aim for being a quarter wave long above a conducting surface. They recreate that resonant antenna, one that really has a natural rhythm that moves charge back and forth at a desired frequency. And they do it with a shorter antenna. And so a lot of the AM transmitting antennas are not actually 200 meters long to 600 meters, 100 meters to 300 meters. They can get by with half that length by going above a conducting surface, and the ground is good enough. So a lot of the transmissions are done with a quarter wave antenna above a conducting surface. This is probably essentially a quarter wave antenna above. This may be acting as the conducting surface. Why would you use? Suppose you want to transmit a wave that has a 1 meter wavelength. To have a 1 meter wavelength, you want 300 million cycles per second, and the wavelength will be 1 meter. If you want to transmit that with a half wave antenna, you want the antenna to be half that long, half a meter. Why? Because it will be resonant for the wave you're transmitting. It will naturally move charge back and forth at just the right rhythm to send out this 300 million cycle per second wave, which is a little above the FM band. FM's to bring this into the world of FM radio, which by convention operates in the vicinity of, it's 88 million cycles per second to 108 million cycles per second. I think that's the official FM band. Let's look at 100 million cycles per second, which is one of the possible stations. 100 million cycles per second. The wavelength of that wave is 3 meters. It's from here to about here. Okay, it's about that long. Too long for my arms by about 50%. A half wave antenna would be half of 3 meters, which is about like that. So that's how long you need it for the transmitting antenna for that wave. And FM radio transmissions may actually be mounted way up high in a mast. The antennas may be high up in a mast, but most of the mast is not the antenna. The antenna sits at the top of the mast, and it would be about that long. And so if you go looking for radio station transmitting antennas, you may actually see it sitting there sort of stuck out from a mast, top and bottom. They may well be using both halves. Not the quarter wave antenna, but rather the full half wave antenna. And it would be about that long. Where do I want to go with this? Okay, so that's what you need to transmit the wave if you're going to use both the top and the bottom of a half wave antenna. If you want to go to a quarter wave antenna, you can snip it in half and put it above a conducting surface like the top of your car. And then the antenna has to be about that long. And that's about a familiar length for a car antenna. It's about like that. Most car antennas are quarter wave antennas sitting above a conducting surface. In modern times, this was certainly the case when I was a kid. They were like that. But you often would lose it in the car wash. You go through the car wash. I forgot to pull down the antenna. It's gone, right? So over the years, they have shrunk the antennas. Now, shrinking the antennas has a consequence. They're no longer resonant. They no longer have this wonderful rhythm effect where you get the charge just sloshing vigorously up and down. They're too short to have that. How do they solve that problem? With fancy electronics. So modern antennas in your cars, some of them are only like this long. They are making do with the antenna's too short. It's not going to work all that well. There are tricks they can do to make it effectively longer than it physically is, like put loops in it. But still, it's not ideal. They put a preamplifier right in the antenna housing, and they make do with tiny little effects and manage to receive them anyway. The consequence there is if you break the thing, it's expensive to replace because it's not just a piece of wire sticking up. It's a wire and a whole bunch of high-tech amplifier. And I took one off my wife's car shoveling snow a couple years ago. You know, the snow was this deep. You take the snow shovel. What was that? Well, that was her antenna, and it was an expensive replacement. Don't break your antennas. All right, so what are the takeaways at this point? Antenna lengths are typically related to the frequency and wavelength of the waves they're interacting with. The classic antenna is half a wavelength long, so you can actually, by looking at the antenna, you can judge approximately what wavelength and frequency the people using that antenna are working with. FM, this is a classic quarter wave antenna. All right? Just to finish the story about transmission and reception, in the ideal situation for transmitting a radio wave and receiving a radio wave, the transmitter gets charged sloshing around vigorously at its desired frequency in a tank circuit. So if the radio station is authorized to transmit at 100 million cycles per second, that's 100 million full cycles per second. The wavelength of that wave, as I said earlier, is 3 meters long. They want a tank circuit that's resonant at 100 million full cycles per second. They also want an antenna sticking up from that, attached to that tank circuit, that is a quarter wavelength long. As an example, I could be halfway, but this is a quarter wave in my story. They want it to be resonant at this, so it should be a quarter as long as the 3 meter wavelength of my wave, namely 3/4 of a meter. They want an antenna that's that long. Why? Because it too is a tank circuit that is resonant at the right frequency. So the transmitter gets lots of charge sloshing in the tank circuit. The tank circuit gets lots of charge sloshing in that quarter wave antenna. The outgoing electromagnetic wave, which in this story is a vertically polarized wave that goes out horizontally, is very strong, blasts across space, and sitting over way out in another city, miles and miles away, is the receiver. I've drawn these guys side by side, but really I could put a divide between those and separate them by miles. And here on the other side is an antenna that is also resonant. It's yet another tank circuit at this magic frequency, a real tank that's resonant at the magic frequency. And as the wave passes, its electric field pushes charge up and down that wire, that antenna wire, and gets the motion going. And the tank circuit starts to have charge sloshing in it. And the receiver simply looks for that sloshing charge, which is, it's another story, but it's easily done. And the whole passage of radio wave is complete. It was launched by a transmitter, headed across space as an electromagnetic wave, and was received by a receiver, which actually picks up the energy that was, it took power from the transmitter to send this wave out. That power is actually delivered to the receiver, which getting its charge sloshing requires energy, and that energy came across space as the electromagnetic wave. Is that okay? Or questions about that transmission idea? Everything in this story is deliberately made to be resonant, to have these natural rhythms that all share the same frequency, because that makes the conveyance of power especially effective. So that is radio, except for one crucial piece, the passage of information. If that's all you do, is just the transmitter just moves charge up and down its antenna steadily, up and down, and up and down, and up and down. The receiver is going to just see charge moving up and down its receiving antenna, up and down and up and down, and no information will be conveyed except that, well, the transmitter's on. Great. So what are you going to do? If you want to actually send, for example, music, everything else, transmitting other types of information is the same idea, but you just convey different information. To send sound information, I'm going to get this. I'll skip through all my questions. To send sound information, you need to play with the wave that you're transmitting. Don't just steadily move charge up and down the antenna. Do something different from time to time. And different like what? Well, AM radio, the AM radio, not the range of frequencies, but rather the concept of how you convey sound. AM radio conveys sound by varying the amplitude of the wave. The sound information is encoded in changes in how strong the wave is from moment to moment. And as an example of how this would be done, first on what's sound? When I'm here talking, what I'm doing is I am taking the air, which normally sits at equilibrium in this room. Equilibrium meaning that each portion of air is experiencing zero net force. And for that to happen, the pressure everywhere in the room has to be uniform. And it is. There's some little effects due to gravity, but that's the basic idea. The pressure, when we're all quiet, is uniform everywhere. If the pressure were a little higher over here than it is over here, there would be a push on the air in between. It would be pushed from high pressure to low pressure, and it would want to move, accelerate. Okay? So in silent, calm air, the pressure is the same everywhere. When I do that, though, I am packing the air locally a little too tight, and its pressure goes up. And when my hand releases, there's a little pocket of high pressure air that then pushes harder on everything else than was normally present. And that air then in here accelerates outward, and it sends a ripple across the room. The ripple spreads out just like if you smack the top surface of a calm lake. The ripple goes out. It travels at a certain speed. On the lake, you can see it going, whew, right? In air, it goes at about 1,000 feet per second, about 300 meters per second. It's pretty fast. Not nearly as fast as the speed of light, but off it goes. So that's what sound is, these little fluctuations in the local pressure and density of the air caused by, well, clapping your hands, or even as you're talking. As I'm talking, I'm making these little fluctuations in the pressure, and off they go. So to just simply send sound from me to you, of course, it goes the entire way as sound. But if we want to send sound by radio, we don't really want to send sound on the radio wave. We simply use the radio wave to represent the sound. We put the information necessary to recreate the sound into the radio wave. And so what is traveling, the point is, what is traveling across miles and miles of empty space isn't literally sound. It's a radio wave that's carrying information, the information necessary to create the sound. So how would you encode the information? Well, first off, you would talk into a microphone, and the microphone's job is to watch the fluctuations in pressure and density in the air and to turn those into currents that represent those same fluctuations in pressure and density. So it might be that when the pressure goes briefly higher than normal, higher than average, you represent that by a current going through the pick a color, yellow wire. When the pressure goes going away from the microphone in the yellow wire, when the pressure goes below average, the current goes the other way. And the stronger the variations in pressure, the larger the currents. So that's basically what a microphone does. It creates currents, a current that's flowing one way or the other with their various strengths that has the same information as the actual sound waves pressure going above and below average. So once you've got a current like that, you could just send it right to a speaker, and the speaker's job is to take the current and turn it into compression and rarefactions of the air to recreate the sound. But if between the microphone and the speaker you have miles of empty space, you don't just send the current from microphone to speaker. You take the current from the microphone and turn it, and use a radio wave to represent it. The radio wave then makes the journey, and then the current is recreated, and then the speaker recreates the sound, and off it goes. So the takeaway from this is I'm trying to get you, try to bring this into a solid form, is you're talking, the pressure changes that are someone's voice, whether it's speaking or singing or whatever, those pressure variations are all you need to recreate the sound with a speaker. Convey those pressure variations by radio. And the two ways in which it has historically been that information has been conveyed are AM and FM radio. AM radio, and I'm going back to where I was 10 minutes ago. AM radio encodes the pressure variations as intensity variations in the radio wave. So if at one moment in time the pressure associated with the musical sound or the voice is high, they turn up the transmitter. They transmit a stronger wave. If at a moment the pressure is low in the voice or the music or the talk, they turn down the transmitter. Which way they choose to turn up or turn down isn't important. They just stick with it. Pick one and stick with it. So this is AM radio. Amplitude modulation. The sound causes variations on the intensity of the wave. And here's the idea. As the pressure of the music goes up and down and up and down and up and down around the average, the intensity of the wave goes up and down and up and down and up and down. How do you make the intensity of the wave vary? Move different amounts of charge up and down your antenna. So during a moment when the sound pressure is high, move a lot of charge up and down the antenna. During a moment when the sound pressure is low, don't move very much charge up and down. Is that okay? So AM modulation is sort of the earliest technique used to convey voice, certainly. And it's a pretty good idea. It's pretty easy to implement electronically. It has the problem that when you're trying to represent low pressures, you're pretty much turning off your transmitter or coming close to turning off your transmitter. There's not much of a wave coming out, and the receiver becomes susceptible to hearing waves from somewhere else that share the same sort of territory. The receiver cannot distinguish it can't distinguish between waves coming from different sources at the same frequency. So if there's a nearby station that's transmitting its sound, and there's a distant station transmitting its sound at the same frequency, so your receiver detects both waves coming in, it can't distinguish between them. It simply plays them both at once. So the sound you hear is a sum of the local station and the faraway station. And this you've probably noticed if you've listened to AM radio, when you're in a region sort of between two stations, two transmitting stations that have been allocated the same frequency by the Federal Communication, you hear both stations at once. They just sit on top of each other because your receiver is just looking for whatever wave it hears, it responds to both. All right, so that's AM radio. Questions about AM transmission? The technique can be used at any frequency you like. It happens to be officially used in that narrow range we call the AM band, around 1 million cycles per second. So that's the AM band, just meaning that that's the one that was conventionally allocated for public use of the AM technique. There's another very useful technique for transmitting sound and other information that doesn't use changes in the intensity of the wave. It uses subtle changes in the frequency of the wave. So this is called FM modulation, which is frequency modulation. FM represents rises and falls in pressure. If it's transmitting voice or music, as the pressure rises and falls, it changes the frequency with which it moves charge up and down its antenna ever so slightly. So when the pressure's a little high, it moves the charge up and down its antenna a little faster, a little more times per second. When the pressure in the voice or music is a little low, it moves the charge up and down a little more slowly and back and forth. And the receiver detects this. It notices, wow, there's a radio wave coming toward me, and the radio wave's frequency is changing subtly, a little bit faster than normal, a little bit slower than normal, back and forth and back and forth, and it moves its speaker accordingly. Whenever the frequency is a little high, it might move the speaker toward you. Whenever the frequency is a little low, it moves the frequency away from you, the speaker away from you, and it recreates the sound in that manner. Now, the FM technique has the advantage that it never turns down the intensity of the waves. The wave is always full strength, which is good because you can receive it better when it's full strength. You can detect it. Your radio receiver can detect it better. The other thing is that FM receivers watch the radio wave they're paying attention to. They watch its frequency moving back and forth a little bit around its official frequency. And if there's a second transmitter located somewhere off in the distance that's sharing the same official frequency and sending its own wave, those two waves both arrive at your receiver. One of them, the local one's stronger than the other, and your receiver can distinguish these two waves, just like your eyes can distinguish red light and blue light coming at you. You can see them both coming, and you can pay only attention to the red light. You're watching its color. It's brighter. You can just ignore the blue. They don't sit on top of each other. Your FM receiver is watching the station that you want to listen to, at least hopefully, move its frequency back and forth, and it can truly ignore the other one. When you get in between the two stations, and the two stations both have waves that are very similar, your receiver may suddenly have trouble, though, sticking with this one and not snapping its attention over to that one. And you've had that experience, too, if you're driving through the countryside, and you're listening to your station, and suddenly another station that you had previously been unaware of snaps into focus. And then this one comes back and forth. Your receiver's having trouble deciding which one to pay attention to, and is flitting back and forth. And eventually you lose the one you wanted, and you're now listening to a new station. But you've probably noticed that effect too, if assuming anybody still listens to radio. Okay, so AM uses this amplitude modulation technique. It's very simple to implement. You convey information by sort of winking on and off. It's a lot like smoke signals. Just a smoking fire conveys no information. But if you wink on and off the smoke with a blanket, you can convey information. Morse code, if nothing else. So AM operates that way. FM operates by changing the frequency, warbling up and down in frequency and conveying information as these gradual changes in frequency. All right. I'll do microwave ovens on Wednesday.